For me, it's simple. I mean, we often never question scaling our business. Conventional wisdom is bigger, faster. Success equals growth and expansion and as fast as possible. But as Ghandi said, and I love this quote, and I always try to keep it in the back of my head, there's more to life than increasing its speed. Profit and revenue scale very differently. Adding more sales to a business that isn't optimized is like pouring water into a strainer. Your first step should be plugging those holes instead of pouring the water. And there's actually a great saying that goes, business without profit is like eating soup with a fork. You keep busy, but you stay hungry. Ladies and gentle fellows, Jason Gaynard here. Welcome to the Community Made podcast. In our last episode 1 of this series, I must say I was pretty proud of it. I think it was a good episode. We talked about why 29,200 is a number you should always keep at the forefront of your mind, why we are all investors, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, and the currency at our disposal is time and energy, and why you and I are at the tail end of some of our most important relationships. In today's episode, I'm going to challenge what I see is a religion in business, the religion of scale. Now, scaling your company obviously has its benefits, but it has its shortcomings as well. And I call this a religion because entrepreneurs tend to have some very strong attachments to this point of view and get very defensive, as many of us do, when somebody challenges our belief system. So what is the religion of scale? Well, it's the belief that success is equal to or measured solely by your ability to scale your business by growing your team, doubling or tripling your revenue, going national or maybe even international. That bigger in essence is always better. Now, I am a pretty active member in the entrepreneurial community, and that means I'm regularly asked, and I consider this a privilege, for my perspective, in essence, when it comes to business strategy, whether it be sitting on the board for a company or just through one-off inquiries from people I meet at events or whatever the case may be, cold outreach, people emailing me all the time. And last year, I had the chance to sit on 2 different board meetings for 2 different companies. And what I found was that both of these meetings were reserved almost entirely for deliberating on 2 things, revenue growth and expansion. And virtually all entrepreneurs continuously kind of question, struggle with, and focus on these 2 aspects of business at the cost of other equally more important metrics of success, in my opinion. Now, I'm going to share these 2 stories with you because I think so many of us can relate. So the first is a story of a friend of mine who has a nice 7-figure business, which was actually doing quite well, but it wasn't growing as fast as she wanted. She's a creative, not an operations person, which is similar to me. And she never pays attention to the numbers, which again is similar to me as well. I smile because I actually just got off the phone with my bookkeeper and got our numbers for the last year. So I'm not a numbers person, and those numbers caught me by surprise in a good way. All this to say she's not really a numbers person. Her profits were decent, but under the existing model, they could have been improved. She loves her customers and built her entire business around word of mouth, spending virtually nothing on marketing. She produces super high quality work. It's a service-based business, but doesn't always charge accordingly. And because of that, her customer retention is virtually perfect. So she had found herself somewhat maxed out from a space and resource perspective and felt that it meant that it was really kind of time to scale. And her question to the board was, I want to go from 4 million to 8 million in the next 3 years. Should I open a new office in a major city and hire more staff? Should I add a new product or a service line? Should I build a sales team? All of the above? And if so, in what order? Now, let me put this to you. I mean, if you were sitting in the room, what advice would you give and why? I want to actually put this back to you because for me, when I listen to podcasts, I tend to try to pause it every once in a while when there's a question asked and think about what my answer would be. And then once I come to my own decision, I guess you could say, then I would press play to see what the guests would say and to see if we were in agreement. If not, it's a great learning opportunity for me. So I want to encourage you to take a moment and do the same. So If this person were to ask you, I want to scale my business from 4 million to 8 million over the next 3 years, how should I do it? Should I grow my team? Should I open another office? Should I expand my services? What would you say? Would you say to get that new office? Would you say to maybe build a virtual team, acquire a competitor? So pause the show right now. We're going to take a few quick seconds and think about what you'd say at that board meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Now, I wish I could hear what your feedback would be to her. Actually, if you go to the Community Made group, if you're not a member, lucky for you, it's free. Just go to communitymade.com and you can sign up. But in the group, there'll be a post for this podcast episode, and I would absolutely love to know what you would have shared as far as feedback, and even challenge my feedback if you wish. So there were about 8 of us in the room, and we were going around the table kind of sharing our thoughts. And thankfully, I was actually going to be one of the last people to speak, which is a good position to be in my personal opinion, because it meant I got to hear the thoughts of everyone else and elaborate on any kind of points if I felt like something was missing. And while most of the advice around the table had to do with the tactics for growth and questions pertaining to the cost of hiring a sales team and opening a new office and that kind of stuff, I sat there trying to kind of separate the signal from the noise, because when people are explaining an issue, there's usually a lot of emotion involved and sometimes missing pieces because of blind spots, and there's no judgment. We all have them. So you need to be able to listen and decide what information kind of really matters versus what's simply noise. So when it was my turn, I decided to start by addressing one of the most important questions that until then no one else had thought to ask, which was, what would scaling from 4 million a year to 8 million a year give you? And with that extra 4 million in revenue, what would that do for you in essence? What would that do for your business? What would that do ultimately, I guess, for your family? And I could tell immediately just by watching the body language of not only her, but everybody in the room, that it kind of struck a chord and took the conversation in a little bit of a different direction. And for me, it's simple. I mean, we often never question scaling our business. Conventional wisdom is bigger, faster, success equals growth and expansion and as fast as possible. But as Ghandi said, and I love this quote, and I always try to keep it in the back of my head, there's more to life than increasing its speed. So what does getting bigger or going faster do for you? It's a very simple question, but it's very, very hard to answer as entrepreneurs. And whenever I ask it for myself, I'm always reminded of something a friend of mine named Mckernan always says, which is, you're better off in life with no goals than chasing ones that belong to someone else. Before you make any decision in business or in life, you really need to interrogate your goals, really question what your goals really are and why you have them. And that takes courage, because it's easy to go through life with blinders and not question anything. But anyway, she was smart. So she knew right away kind of where I was going with it. So she started to say things like, well, I would definitely be busier. I would probably have to work on weekends. I'd probably have to take on some debt. And working on weekends, for example, would mean less time with my family, which I knew she's very family oriented. And this would be quite the cost for her. So really, in that case, is it worth it when you start kind of considering those answers? We have a tendency to assume that doubling our revenue will often double our profits. And this is definitely, I think, a mirage in business. And I came to the harsh realization that that's not the way the math works, in essence. In my last business, profits and revenue scale very differently. I don't remember the numbers exactly, but what we were doing, probably about $1.5 million a year, we were doing about 400,000. I was thinking we were about $375,000 to $400,000 in profit. And I remember the naive assumption that I made was that if we doubled our revenues to 3 million, we would nearly double our profit. So maybe we'd get close to 800,000 in profit. And again, I was incredibly naive, and it didn't take me long to discover that profit and revenue scale very, very differently. The truth is that every business has a sweet spot or different levels of sweet spots. And to scale from one sweet spot to another, there's a lot of infrastructure costs like staff, office space, furnishing, hardware, software. I mean, these things add up. And you never know exactly where the next sweet spot is going to be. And you often incur huge costs of doing business to get there. So you may have hit a highly profitable plateau at 1.5 million in sales. and the next one may be at 10 million or 20 million, or maybe you'll never even achieve that next sweet spot. So it's important to debunk the idea that more revenues equal more profits, which brings me, and I'll actually bring this back to myself. In full transparency, I'm surprised I'm putting this out there. I just got off the phone again with my bookkeeper, and I'm working with my bookkeeper and my accountant on our year end, and we did $2 million in sales this year with a staff of one, basically. I mean, it's myself, and I'm obviously on payroll, and my assistant, Rachel. And my wife Candace is a part of the business as well, but she really comes in towards the tail end of the planning process. And we're at that sweet spot. And if we wanted to continue to scale, at least in the traditional sense, which is, maybe do a second event or go bigger, which is the traditional model for scaling in the event space, we would have to incur a lot more infrastructure costs. I'd have to hire a significant amount of more staff. I'd have to most likely get an office to house that staff. We could potentially go virtual, but there's still software costs. There's costs incurred with that. It's one of those things that I'm certain. I can't share I don't feel comfortable sharing our profit margins publicly, but I will say they are very healthy. Especially, again, you can just get a picture that if I have one staff member, things are going pretty well for us when we're doing $2 million in revenue. But, if you were to double in size, I'm not doubling profits. I'm probably not even doing 50% more profits, but I'm going to have twice the amount of headaches most likely. And along with, again, a lot of infrastructure costs. So I share this to take us into our second point about the importance of building a well-oiled business machine. Again, my friend was not a numbers person, and her feeling was that the existing state of her company was not 100% profitable. There was still profit to be had in that model. So I told her that before she thought about scaling, she needed to really squeeze the juice out of the lemon she already had. So many of us make the mistake, myself included, where we skip right into scaling when we actually need better systems, or we need a better team, or we need better operational processes, or those kind of things in order to, before we can successfully expand in a way that will actually increase profit. Again, profit and revenue scale very differently. Adding more sales to a business that isn't optimized is like pouring water into a strainer. Your first step should be plugging those holes instead of pouring the water. And there's actually a great saying that goes, business without profit is like eating soup with a fork. You keep busy, but you stay hungry. Now, don't get me wrong, it is far more exciting to focus on boosting sales. It's way sexier to add another $1 million of revenue to our balance sheet than it is to add $50,000 of profit to our bottom line. But make no mistake, profit is king. Revenues matter, of course, and they're the lifeblood of the business, but profit is the real measure of your success as an operator. Revenues can be deceptive. There are plenty of entrepreneurs out there with 7 or 8-figure businesses who are still living paycheck to paycheck. And at the end of the day, in my view, someone with a 6-figure business that keeps 70% of it is more successful than somebody who does 8 figures in their business, but is consistently simply scraping by. So that's what I told my friend at our board meeting. Profit and revenue scale very differently. Boosting revenue does not mean you will increase profits, and really ask yourself, what will scaling give you? And is that really what you want? Which brings me to the other board meeting I had the privilege of sitting on last year. And in this case, it was an entrepreneur who had a budding online/offline business who wanted to expand across North America. And the logic was enter as many new markets as possible in order to kind of scale the business rapidly. And of course, in today's business landscape, thanks to newly available resources of e-commerce and fulfillment, national or international expansion looks very different than it did 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, or even 2 years ago. If you're playing online, it's never been easier to go nationwide or even global. And because the barrier to entry has lowered significantly, why wouldn't you just simply want to go worldwide out of the gate? So the advisors in that boardroom were deliberating on various strategies on how to do exactly that. And this guy's business was an online booking site, in essence, for an offline service, I guess you could say. And entering a new market for him wouldn't take anything more than just throwing up a new landing page. And conventional wisdom is like, again, hell yeah, why would you not just open up a landing page for every single different market and go international? But the old, again, contrarian in me had a different viewpoint. And that viewpoint is based on experience because I've actually been through the same motions several times years ago in my first business and very recently actually with Mastermind Talks. Now, when it was my turn to speak at this board meeting, I shared my two past experiences with expansion. The first one was my very first business, and it was a concierge service that I started when I was 18. And back then, my entire business model was built on national expansion. I wanted to go with the franchise model with the goal of eventually having 18 locations across Canada. I don't remember how I came up with 18 locations, but it sounded good. And I remember we went on this television show. So there's a show in Canada called Dragon's Den, which is basically Shark Tank is a spinoff of Dragon's Den. Robert Herjavec used to be a part of Dragon's Den in Canada, as was... what's his name? What is his name? Mr. Wonderful, Kevin O'Leary. That's who it is, Kevin O'Leary. So I went on Dragon's Den to pitch the idea of this national kind of model to these dragons or investors. And looking back, I realized that my desire to franchise was purely driven by one thing and one thing only: ego. It would have taken an incredible amount of overhead to achieve national kind of expansion. So there's a very good chance that it actually wasn't the best business strategy. But the one thing it would have enabled me to say and brag about was that we have locations across the country. And we may not have been profitable and probably would have offered our clients mediocre experience, but we were nationwide. And I told him that looking back, I'm glad things didn't work out that way because I know that being big does not mean that your company is profitable or that it's thriving or that you're offering a great customer experience. I then told him my experience with Mastermind Talks and how I had an opportunity that came up after our first event in 2013 where one of our speakers who came in loved the event so much that he wanted to bring the event to the UK and was willing to financially back the entire thing. Even better, he told me I could be as involved or as little involved as I wanted to be. And that was like the dream scenario. But right before I signed the contract, I started to ask myself, why do I want this so bad? What is my motivation? What am I really kind of going after here? What am I looking to achieve? And I remember the deeper I dug, the more I realized it stemmed again purely from ego. And it would have given me the ability, in essence, to say and brag that I do an event in North America and I do an event in the UK, that I'm international, so to speak. And once I realized it was ego-driven, it was clear that it was not for the right reason, so I didn't do it. I guess here's the thing. Small businesses, this is something people don't, especially small businesses don't get this. But I've been very blessed to be around a lot of small business owners and a lot of big business owners. And this is one truth that I've discovered. Small business owners have a strong desire to be big, and big businesses oftentimes want to be small. Small companies are agile. They can pivot quickly based on market feedback. And in today's day and age, the markets move so fast and there's so much competition that you need to be able to be agile and nimble. And big businesses simply don't have that ability oftentimes. It's the difference between, turning around a cruise ship versus a canoe. So, I mean, if I think a company off the top of my head, I mean, it's like Instagram started with 13, when they were acquired, I think by Facebook, they were at 13 employees. Kodak had 145,000, right? Instagram sold for $1 billion. Kodak declared bankruptcy in 2012. Another example would be like Airbnb. Probably last year now, they were at 600 employees. We did a behind the scenes tour with Joe Gebbia in April, actually, April of last year, and there were 600 employees. At the same time, Hilton had 152,000 employees, and Airbnb now has more rooms available on their site than all of the Hilton properties combined. You don't think Hilton wants to be Airbnb, and you don't think that Kodak wanted to be Instagram? Being big, it can be a liability in so many ways. Large companies have massive amounts of overhead required to sustain themselves. And the truth is, we don't trust big brands like we used to. I don't trust meat from the grocery store. I much prefer to buy it directly from the farmer. And the reason why is because very often when dealing with smaller companies, and I think this is maybe a generational thing, I'm 32, and a lot of my peers, I think, subscribe to this as well, is that when dealing with smaller companies or brands, there's a story there. And that's why you see storytelling so important in business now. But there's a story there, there's heart, there's care, there's at least the perception, and oftentimes it's the truth, but at least the perception that there's a better quality product or service. And that's precisely the reason why big brands are losing market share and swallowing up these smaller brands with loyal customers left, right, and center. I mean, Casamigos, which is a tequila company, it's about 4 years old, which was started by George Clooney and two other partners, recently sold to Diageo, which is an enormous, I think they're probably the 800-pound gorilla in the alcohol and spirit space. They sold for $700 million, and there's actually $300 million available to them on the back end based on performance metrics, but $700 million in essence. Organic food company Annie's, and if you have a kid, you're probably very familiar with Annie's. They're all over Whole Foods and stuff like that. They were acquired by General Mills for $820 million. Dollar Shave Club, which most of you may be familiar with because they had a very, very viral content, I want to say content marketing campaign, but video campaign specifically, they sold to Unilever in the last year for $1 billion. So it's generally, for these bigger companies, oftentimes it's difficult for them to scale up production for mass markets and retain a high level of quality in their goods and service. So again, that's one of the core reasons why we prefer these smaller, more boutique brands. And even also from a brand perspective, I can't stress this enough. This is something I learned from a fantastic book called 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, that it's better to have no presence in a market than to have poor presence. I would rather service a small group of individuals really, really well than to serve a large group of people poorly. So instead of expanding, why not double down in your existing market? A great example of this is a company who chose to go deep called Zingerman's. Now, they were founded in 1982. They serve one market, just one city, Ann Arbor, Michigan. And if you're a naive Canadian like me, Ann Arbor, Michigan is obviously in Michigan. It is a college town. That's where the University of Michigan is. And the reason I know that is because I had to drive to St. Louis earlier this year and went to go stop in Ann Arbor to go to Zingerman's because I'm familiar with the brand. And I want to go for lunch. And no dice. There was a huge, huge lineup. But in general, anything in Ann Arbor around lunchtime is almost impossible to get into because there's so many students. But in that one city, they do over $60 million in sales as of 2015. $60 million by going deep in one market. Now, they started off as a deli, but they own a deli, they own a bakery, they own a restaurant and a catering company and a creamery. So they just went deep in that one single market. To me, studying companies like this, and there are many, many examples of them, will make you rethink what is possible when you focus. Scaling for the sake of scaling is not necessarily the key to a company's success by any means. Anyways, so getting back to this board meeting, his business was doing less than $1 million a year across 10 markets, which meant that the company was probably not equipped to handle the overhead costs of national expansion. So I took a piece of paper with a long list of target markets that he had identified and that they wanted to kind of move into, and I folded it in half. And I said to him, could you do $10 million a year in these 5 markets? And he replied, yes. So I said, you may want to let that kind of soak in. To me, it's almost like light. You can use light to light up a room, or you can concentrate it with a magnifying glass and cut like a laser. So the moral of these two stories are twofold. First, don't just scale for the sake of scaling. Really stop to think about the realities of scale and what it's going to look like for you to actually achieve it. It might not be what you want for yourself or for your business. And the second thing is, it's incredibly important for anybody, but particularly entrepreneurs, to seriously interrogate your goals, because so often the goals we have aren't even goals of our own. Now, like many entrepreneurs, I was told to pick my business based on 2 things: opportunity and leverage. What opportunity was out there within my grasp that I could leverage my skill set with the ideal goal of scaling and exiting one day? And I thought that's what I wanted, and I nearly killed myself kind of trying to achieve it. I was sacrificing my family, my friends, my health, living my life only for work. And I'll always remember one night this was in 2011. I had been running my company quite successfully for 7 years up until that point. And I was driving alone in my car, and I pulled up to a red light, and I was just sitting there alone in silence, just waiting for the light to change. And I looked up at myself in the mirror, and out of nowhere, I thought to myself, I don't know if it was just a voice that I heard, that your father never said he was proud of you. And I completely broke down right there, right in the middle of the road, for like several minutes, just bawling. And looking back, I remember when I started my first, business, my first foray into entrepreneurship was a snow shoveling business and a lawn cutting service. And I did that when I was 13. And my dad said nobody would hire me. And when I applied for my first job when I was 14, he said I wouldn't get it. And when I left my full-time job as a mechanic to start my own company when I was 18, he said I was crazy. And that insatiable drive to achieve that had shaped the course of my adult life up until that point was compelled pretty much entirely by my desire to, number one, finally receive some kind of validation from my dad. And number two, and I'm not necessarily proud of this, but to someday be able to throw all my success back in his face and say, I told you so. Now, you may be saying to yourself, great story, but that's not me. And I respect that. But what happens if we were just to play along? I hope that we can all agree that validation, we're all validation seekers on some level. I mean, Facebook, Instagram, in essence, are validation, significance platforms at their core. So just for a moment, consider one question. Who are you seeking validation from today? And actually, I'll give you a follow-up question. How does that show up in your life? Who are you seeking validation from today? And how does that show up in your life? We all seek validation from one person, generally above all else. And oftentimes it's the one person whose love we yearn for the most as a child. And you may be asking yourself at this point, where's this going? What does this have to do with scaling a business? Everything. I promise you, it has everything to do with scaling a business. As entrepreneurs, we've been taught that our end goal is to sell. A profitable exit equals success, but is that actually what we really want? If it is, then why do so many of us struggle after we sell our businesses? Depression, drugs and alcohol. I have a ton of friends that struggle during those transition periods. And that period can be tough. There's a saying that when one door closes, another one opens, but it sucks to be stuck in the hallway. The rubber meets the road once you sell your business, once you achieve those goals, and you're like, yeah, you know what? That actually, I'm not getting the feeling I was hoping to achieve by selling my business. And I have no entrepreneurs one specifically, but I know one entrepreneur who ended up selling his business for a 9-figure exit. And a lot of that 9-figure exit was his. Like, he actually didn't have many investors. And he ended up, after 3 months, going crazy and buying his business back at a premium after he sold it. So I'll say it again. You're better off in life with no goals than chasing ones that belong to someone else. So self-awareness around your goals and your pursuits is absolutely crucial. And I want you to interrogate your biggest goal. Just pick one. Interrogate your biggest goal. Ask why until it hurts. Sit down and do this with a friend. I do this. I have great friends, thankfully, and they challenge me all the time when it comes to my goals. I also do it to myself because I've been doing this for 14 years. It's super uncomfortable, but it is priceless in the end. There's a saying that by Peter Drucker that there's nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency something that shouldn't be done at all. Again, I can't stress enough the importance of really interrogating your goals. So let me give you an example of an interrogation around scale. So here we go. So let's say I ask somebody, why do you want to scale your business? That person says, so we can be the industry leader in our space. Well, why do you want to be the industry leader in your space? So we can position ourselves for a big exit. Well, why do you want to position yourself for a big exit? So we can make a lot of money. Well, why do you want to make a lot of money? You're probably seeing where this is going. So that I can have freedom. Well, great. Why will money give you freedom? What does freedom look like? Why do you need to sell your business in order to achieve freedom? Ask yourself why until it hurts. And when it starts to hurt, there's a good chance that you're being pushed to give up a truth that isn't actually yours, in essence. And oftentimes, I mean, you're going to start seeing, at least in my case, I'll put this all on me. You'll start to see your own kind of faulty logic unravel right before your eyes. And again, it's terrifying, but that truth is absolutely priceless. And again, uncomfortable exercise, but to me, it's proven to be absolutely invaluable over the years. Goal setting goes wrong when what you're doing and why you're doing it doesn't align. We set monetary goals because money lets us buy things, but usually things aren't what we're actually after. What we're looking for is the perception of how these things will make us feel. A $30 watch gives the exact same time as a $300 watch or a $3,000 watch. But wearing a $3,000 watch makes you feel a different way, right? And if you don't subscribe into how your personal life shows up in your business, let me share with you a fundamental truth that I've learned about money. Money is an amplifier. It doesn't change anything. It just intensifies what's already there. So if you have a negative relationship to money, the more money you have, the worse that relationship will get. If you struggle with insecurities, guess what? That'll be amplified with the more money you have. If you're philanthropic, fantastic, amplified. If you're an asshole, amplified, right? Money is an amplifier. And Coco Chanel said it best. She had a saying that the best things in life are free. The second best things are very, very expensive. You won't find happiness or self-worth or fulfillment in things. If you can't be happy with a little bit of money, there's a very good chance you won't be happy with a lot of it. So I really can't emphasize enough how important it is to really interrogate your goals and your intentions and what you really want to achieve personally and professionally as you build your company. Now, when I sit down with an entrepreneur and really get to know them, start to understand their motivations for building a big business, it usually comes down to wanting to spend more time with their kids and wanting to go on vacations and wanting a better quality of life. But they're stuck in this hamster wheel of building their business, and they defer all of these things, telling themselves that they can't do it now, they'll do it later. But here are some facts about the best case scenario of selling your business based on recent government figures. Roughly 20% of new businesses survive past the first year of operation. Less than 4% survive the 10-year mark. And note that I said survive. I didn't say thrive. So if you're in that 4%, that's a hell of an achievement. Congrats. But doesn't mean you're making bank. And reliable sources report that approximately 20% of small businesses are for sale at any one time, which is a number, honestly, that caught me off guard a little bit. But the one thing that didn't catch me off guard was that 20 to 25% of those businesses will actually sell. So even if you're lucky enough to have a viable business idea that becomes profitable, that makes it past the 1-year mark or 10-year mark, there's only about a 20 to 25% chance that you'll finally be able to sell one day. If any of this hits home for you, then my point is do not defer your life until later because you don't know what's going to happen in your company. You don't know what's going to happen in the market. You can't bank on the best case scenario happening to you. If it does, fantastic, that's gravy, but you can't bank on it. You don't need $100 million or $10 million or $1 million in the bank to go on an extended vacation with your family. You don't need any money in order to spend quality time with your kids. Get clear on your motivations, your desired outcomes, and stop making excuses and delaying things that are within your reach. Take that family vacation. Spend the time with your kids when they're young and work on those relationships that matter, the relationship with your family, the relationship with your friends, the relationship with your spouse. Because if you desire to sell your business, you're banking on something where the odds are, again, simply not in your favor. Even in the face of what I just shared, most will succumb to the sunk cost bias and won't have the courage to challenge, let alone consider the fact that they may be climbing up the wrong mountain. What most do in that case is they put on their blinders, as I may mention earlier, and just keep chugging along. And even though they know in their hearts that what they're doing is not in alignment, they continue to do it. And I see it all the time. And it sucks because you know the end result is one thing and one thing only, a life of regret. There's a great book called The 5 Regrets of the Dying, and it was written by a nurse who I believe is based in Australia, who counseled the dying in their last few days and revealed the most common regrets that people have at the end of their lives. And you know what the number one regret was? I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. That number one regret plays right into what I was saying before. You're better off in life with no goals than chasing ones that belong to someone else. The second regret, which I'll share with you, was I wish I hadn't worked so hard. And my personal interpretation of that is that people don't regret working hard. People regret working hard on the wrong things. Working hard is not the enemy. Working on the wrong things, working on things you don't want to do, working on things that don't fulfill you, working towards goals that aren't true to you, that's the biggest mistake we can make. Seth Godin, if you're not familiar with him, very well-known business author, multiple books in his portfolio, I guess you could say, and is famous for doing a blog post a day for the last 9 years, has a great saying that if it's work, you'll try to figure out how to do less. If it's art, you'll figure out how to do more. I'm going to end this episode with a fable that when I first heard it really hit home, but little did I know it would fundamentally just shift my perception on everything when it comes to scale. An American investment banker was at the pier of a small coastal Mexican village when a small boat with just one fisherman docked. Inside the small boat were several large yellowfin tuna. The American complimented the Mexican on his quality of fish and asked how long it took to catch them. The Mexican replied, "Only a little while." The American then asked, "Why didn't you stay out longer to catch more fish?" The Mexican said he had enough to support his family's needs. The American then asked, "But what do you do with the rest of your time?" The Mexican fisherman said, "I sleep late, fish a little, play with my children, take siestas with my wife Maria, stroll into the village each evening where I sip wine and play guitar with my amigos. I have a full and busy life." The American scoffed. He said, "I'm a Harvard MBA and I could help you. You should spend more time fishing and with the proceeds buy a bigger boat. With the proceeds from the bigger boat, you could buy several boats. Eventually, you would have enough of a fleet of fishing boats. Instead of just selling your catch to a middleman, you should sell it directly to the processor, eventually opening your own cannery. You would control the product processing and distribution. You would need to leave this small coastal village and move to Mexico City, then LA, and eventually New York City, where you'll run your expanding enterprise." The Mexican fisherman asked, "But how long will that take?" To which the American replied, 15 to 20 years. "But what then?" asked the Mexican. The American laughed and said, "The best part, when the time is right for you, you will announce an IPO and sell the company's stock to the public and become very rich. You will make millions." "Millions? Then what?" The American said, "Then you would retire, move to a small coastal village where you would sleep in late, fish a little, play with your kids, take siestas with your wife, stroll through the village in the evenings where you could sip wine and play guitar with your amigos." I share this story as a reminder that we often construct a life of complexity with the end goal of achieving a life of simplicity. The logic is wrong, and it's an ass-backwards way of approaching life, and it's something I've been guilty of as well. We really need to ask ourselves why. Ask why until it hurts, and figure out how to align what we're doing with why we are doing it. That is it for episode 2 of the Community Made podcast. Be sure to check out episode 3, where I share the 8 steps in designing your perfect calendar. If you enjoyed today's episode, reach out to me. Reach out to me on Twitter at Jason Gaynard, JasonGaynard, or email me at any time at jason@communitymade.com. For show notes and resources mentioned in this episode, simply visit the Community Made group. If you're not a member, lucky for you, it's free. Simply go to communitymade.com to get access. Also, listen, I appreciate all feedback. For me, when it comes to this podcast, I'm putting everything I have into it. I'm not doing any fancy marketing campaigns or anything like that. My goal is that instead of spending my energy on marketing, I'd rather spend my energy on revising these podcast episodes and just putting out the best content I can. So if it resonated with you, I would be forever grateful if you share it with either a friend or share it on social media, leave a review on iTunes, rate it on iTunes. I appreciate your love and support more than you'll ever know, and it means the world to me, especially this early in the launch of the podcast. So I'm Jason Gaynard. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Community Made Podcast.